The bedrock of Australian politics is quietly cracking. Right under our noses, a massive realignment is happening that is completely flipping the traditional two-party script. If you think you know how the next federal election plays out, you really need to see this new data. We are looking at the great realignment and a total political fracture.
31%. That single primary vote statistic is sending absolute shockwaves through the political establishment right now. For decades, we've been locked into this predictable two-party battle, right? But suddenly, a massive shift in voter loyalty has shattered the electorate along lines we have literally never seen before. It's not just a temporary protest vote anymore. It's a slow-burn migration that has exploded into full-blown political chaos.
And to see the sheer scale of this disruption, just look at this mid to late May 2026 primary polling from Redbridge. Pauline Hanson's One Nation is surging to 31% primary support. They are literally overtaking the governing Labour Party, which is sitting at 28% on first preference votes. And a Liberal National Coalition? Well, they've collapsed to a historic low of just 20%. This completely breaks traditional electoral modeling.
Which forces us to ask a pretty crucial question. Is one of Australia's oldest political forces facing a total existential collapse? We aren't looking at the usual Labour versus Liberal showdown anymore. Instead, we're tracking a highly volatile three-way contest. Historically, One Nation really only drew a very specific slice of disaffected Conservative voters. But right now, they're pulling in general protest voters, younger demographics, and former Labour supporters.
And the demographics driving this are wildly counterintuitive. You'd probably assume this surge is fueled by older voters. Actually, you'd be wrong. While Gen Z, so those 18 to 29, remains heavily anchored to the left, millennials, voters aged 30 to 45, have executed this dramatic rightward pivot. 30% of millennials are now backing One Nation compared to just 16% for the coalition.
And here is exactly why. 12%. That is the tiny, miserable percentage of millennials who actually felt the May 2026 federal budget offered them any personal help. This generation is getting absolutely crushed right now by the compounding pressures of inflation, soaring interest rates, and just impossible housing costs. 34% of them explicitly rated the budget's impact on their lives is downright bad. Their traditional party loyalties haven't just weakened, they've completely broken down under intense economic stress, which creates a massive political vacuum. If the establishment has completely lost the plot on the generation actively trying to buy homes and raise families, where do those millions of votes go next? When the basic dream of owning a home feels like it's slipping away, everyday voters stop listening to the establishment and they start looking for alternative voices who speak directly to that financial anxiety.
So what exactly was the trigger point here? Well, it all comes down to the federal budget on May 12th. The government introduced these highly technical, abstract property tax reforms, heavily restricting things like negative gearing and capital gains. They thought this would rebalance the housing market, but the math was so complex that it just generated widespread panic. Compound that with the budget boosting net overseas migration by 55,000, and populist alternatives weaponized the moment perfectly, linking immigration directly to the housing shortage and skyrocketing rents.
The human impact of this disconnect is just staggering. Usually look after themselves. That's what 74% of One Nation voters now explicitly say about politicians. For fly-in fly-out workers, small business owners, and local farmers, abstract tax math and net zero targets feel entirely irrelevant to their daily economic survival. This entire political shift is a direct reflection of a massive, profound trust deficit. Now, if you think this is all just theoretical polling talk, let's look at what just happened on the ground with the Frawr disruption. The first real-world test of this new political reality went down in the regional New South Wales electorate of Frawr during a high-stakes by-election. This wasn't just a slight swing, it was an absolute electoral shockwave that subverted everything we thought we knew about safe seats.
The primary vote numbers out of Frawr are a literal bloodbath. One Nation's candidate absolutely dominated, taking home nearly 40% of the primary vote, while the combined Liberal and National vote collapsed to just 22%. Think about that for a second. This is the first time in modern political history that the final two-candidate count in a federal seat didn't even feature a major Conservative party. Even Treasurer Jim Chalmers openly called it exactly that, a bloodbath. The traditional establishment was completely locked out.
The traditional political map is actively fracturing in real time, and it leaves every single incumbent looking over their shoulder. If a historically untouchable regional stronghold like Frawr can completely collapse and lock out the majors this fast, who is actually safe? Who is immune to this populist surge?
But it gets even more intense, because this isn't just a rural phenomenon. It is slamming right into traditional working-class heartlands, too. Take the South Australian industrial seats. In Labour's absolute safest strongholds in northern Adelaide, places like Elizabeth and Light, which normally hold these massive, seemingly untouchable margins above 19%, One Nation came out of nowhere to record primary votes exceeding 30%. The electoral pendulum completely inverted. Safe Labour seats suffered a massive 6.7% swing away from the government, turning comfortable havens into ultra-marginals overnight.
Now, we do have to pause for a reality check here on the statistical variance behind these polling shifts. Political experts are urging some serious caution over what these numbers actually mean. Translating raw primary votes into actual parliamentary seats is incredibly complex. The underlying math reveals a high level of statistical volatility, meaning this race is far from a foregone conclusion.
Across these surveys, the margin of error calculation hovers around 2.3 to 3.7%, depending on the sample size. That statistical variance means the primary vote race between Labour and these populist insurgents is still incredibly tight. I mean, it is on an absolute knife edge. A minor shift within this tiny margin of roughly 2.3% could drastically alter the final makeup of Parliament.
Which brings us to the absolute biggest point of conflict, the preference flow trap. In the 2025 election, coalition preferences flowed overwhelmingly to One Nation, hitting 80.1% in some areas. But look at 2026. That flow weakened significantly to just 66.6%. This leaves the major conservative parties in a brutal strategic bind. Do they recommend their voters preference Labour to stop the populist surge, or do they risk completely infuriating their own conservative members?
And the stakes of this trap are massive. Expert analysis pinpoints exactly 25 highly vulnerable federal electorates right now where the final winner will be decided by messy, unpredictable, three-candidate preferred counts. In these 25 seats, it is a high-stakes game of mathematical chess. Tiny shifts in how voters allocate their second and third preferences won't just decide a local member. They are going to dictate the entire election and decide who actually forms government. So where does this leave us? We are basically staring down three very realistic futures. Scenario A is the strategic pivot. The government actively tries to claw back its lost support in the outer suburbs. They walk back their abstract property tax reforms, maybe expand tax offsets for working Australians, and slap strict caps on overseas migration to cool down housing demand. By stabilizing their heartland, they arrest the populist slide and manage to scrape through to form a narrow minority government.
But then there is scenario B, the balance of power. Economic conditions stay brutal, and that millennial housing anxiety just keeps climbing. One Nation manages to hold its primary vote way up above 25% and rides those preference flows across regional Australia and the industrial suburbs. The election ends in a totally deadlocked hung parliament. One Nation marches onto the crossbench with 15 to 25 seats, seizing absolute balance of power. They would force the major parties into grueling direct negotiations on immigration, energy, and spending, fundamentally paralyzing the traditional legislative process.
And finally, Scenario C, the total collapse of the right. The coalition completely fails to recover from its internal divisions. They prove unable to compete with populist messaging in the regions, and their traditional base fragments entirely. In this scenario, they are reduced to a minor partner on the opposition benches. What takes their place? A decentralized, aggressive bloc of populist independents acting as the new permanent voice of regional and working-class Australia.
We are watching a fundamental rewriting of the political rulebook. The data makes one thing absolutely clear. When complex economic reforms fail to connect with daily survival, what replaces traditional political loyalties? They just dissolve. The real unknown hanging over this entire election cycle isn't just who wins. It's this. Once that baseline trust in the establishment is totally broken, what completely new political force steps in to fill the void?
An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, so why not invest in this channel? Click like and subscribe for more.